Remnant 2 has a wide selection of 103 amulets to choose from. How do they compare against one another? Just like the ring tier list, these rankings are made from the perspective of a mostly solo Apocalypse player, although consideration of an amulet's effectiveness in co-op will be taken into account when discussing them. Before we get started, here's a quick reminder for the rankings. Excellent amulets either make other options obsolete, or are just that powerful in their effects that they earn their place at the top. Very good amulets are great picks for various builds that may come with a catch or caveat, but are easily outweighed by the benefits they give. Decent amulets are solid filler picks if you don't know what you want to do with your build. Some of them do lean closer to the niche side or require a lot of effort to reap their effects. Weak/niche amulets are outclassed by those above, need way too much effort to make them worth it, or are just generally unimpactful. Terrible amulets are severely underpowered and should be avoided at all costs. As a small yet important addendum to these rankings, from now on I will be taking unintended bugs and exploits into consideration when ranking aspects of Remnant 2. Last time I was huffing a bit too much copium. Now that I've been discharged from the hospital, I've accepted the game is in its final state, making all remaining exploits and bugs fair game when it comes to ranking them. Like I also mentioned in the ring tier list, if you really like a necklace I rank low, don't let that stop you from using it. The point of these videos is to spark discussion about the balance of Remnant 2, which is why I highly recommend leaving a comment down below with your own takes. Without further ado, let's get into it. First up in excellent tier is Reaction Chain. Increases mod damage by 20%. Activating a mod generates 50% of mod power spent to the stowed weapons mod. This refund, of course, scales with sources that increase mod power generation, allowing for some back-to-back mod spam. This obviously works best in an Archon setup, but you can totally run it in other builds. Activating a bullet mod will charge your stowed weapons bullet mod by half so long as you aren't using defrag. This cuts down on mod downtime dramatically in cases where you're using medium and high cost mods. Depending on your setup, you could potentially loop 2 mods indefinitely. Words alone can't do this necklace justice. If you haven't used this one before, I implore you to give it a try. Abrasive Whetstone. When attacking a bleeding enemy, critical chance is increased by 15%, and critical damage is increased by 15%. Ah, the classics. Even though this one's been nerfed like all the other great crit trinkets, it's still one of the best. Applying bleed is super easy thanks to the various methods we have at our disposal. Twisting wounds, pipe bombs, miasma, merciless, blood jewel, abrasive rounds, etc. Easy application plus a crit chance and crit damage boost equals a good amulet. Gift of Euphoria. Spending 20 stamina grants 5% critical chance for 5 seconds, max 5 stacks. Like many other trinkets in Remnant 2, Gift of Euphoria is one I slept on for a long time. I always assumed this was a necklace that needed constant maintenance, however it actually needs very little. Unlike a lot of trinkets in Remnant 2, Euphoria stacks drain one at a time, making the 5-second timer not really that intimidating. And since hitting max stacks is as simple as dodging a few times, you'll have that fat 25% global crit chance boost constantly. Even if you lose a stack or two, it's no big issue. At most, this necklace encourages a bit of investment into the recovery trait, but even without it, it's more than capable. Its existence is the reason why I have a few crit trinkets and weak/niche and terrible. Volatile Cartridge. Increases explosive critical chance and explosive critical damage by 1% for every 5% of max health protected by a shield. Originally, I was going to place this necklace somewhere between very good and decent. However, as I played with it, I noticed something was off. For some reason, defensive measures made a full shield give less stacks than without having it. After consulting the wikis, I found a comment that mentioned an interaction between this necklace and Warden's drone. After some experimentation, it turns out having a second source of shield breaks this necklace's calculation, allowing it to gain more than 20 stacks. As the comment points out, it seems to be giving stacks for every 5 flat health rather than 5% total health. This means anything that increases max health also doubles as an explosive crit boosting source. Seal of the Empress, Dead King's Memento, Tonic, Vigor, etc. become even better picks with this necklace. To proc the bug constantly, I recommend running Shielded Heart with Insulator. After popping Shielded Heart, simply fire your weapon and you'll get your bonus stacks. This bug makes Volatile Cartridge one of the best crit necklaces in the game, especially when you run it with Power Fantasy. Brewmaster's Cork. Increases active concoction limit by 2 and reduces all incoming damage by 2% for each active concoction. On its own, this necklace isn't really that special. However, when combined with every other source that increases your max concoction count, you can hit 26% DR. If one of your concoctions is Meat Shake, and why wouldn't it be, it becomes 32.5% DR. This is a huge boost to your DR with no other penalty attached. Outside of this playstyle though, it's definitely less desirable. When used in the right build however, it's one of the best defensive necklaces. Butcher's Fetish increases critical chance by 15% and critical damage by 25% for 5 seconds after striking an enemy with a charged melee attack. I'm certain everyone saw this coming. Butcher's Fetish is simply one of the best melee trinkets in the game. Even with the duration cut down to a third of its original length, it's still amazing. The fact the crit bonuses aren't locked to just your melees is what elevates this necklace well above the rest of the roster. You can equip any ranged melee and gain the same benefits by just tossing them. 5 seconds is pretty short with this playstyle though. Spending your time wisely after proccing the effect is vital to fully benefiting from the amulet. This thing is so good, I find it difficult to not pick it when making a melee build. Chef Metal. On perfect dodge, automatically trigger effects that require relic use to activate. Have you ever wanted a way to keep your archetype relic perk buffs up 24/7? Well, this necklace is the one for you. To say this necklace is amazing would be an understatement. Unless you're running a face tank build, chances are you're going to be dodging pretty often. This leads to the necklace proccing both your relic perks and any perfect dodge rings you have equipped very frequently. In my ring tier list, I specifically mention wishing the on-relic use damage rings gave more damage or lasted longer. Thanks to this amulet, you'll practically always have them up. This amulet is actually the only way I'll ever run Transient Cord. It's not a bad ring, but the constant draining makes it feel bad to use otherwise. Obviously, some relic perks are not activation based, so it's worth considering your archetype options when you want to run Chef Metal. Crisis Core. When a single source of enemy damage exceeds 15% of max health, automatically trigger effects that require perfect dodge to activate and gain 15% damage reduction for 3 seconds. Can only happen once every 3 seconds. Here we have Chef Metal for face tank builds. Although depending on what rings you run, it could be even more powerful. Wearing tanky armor more than likely means you're gonna end up heavy rolling, or flopping if you're wearing one of the top 3 defensive sets. While you can mitigate their weight issues via strong back, trinkets, and concoctions, you can also just wear this necklace and gain the benefits of perfect dodge sources without ever actually dodging. This lets you utilize rings like Akari, Bypass Primer, Matriarch's Ring, Nightmare Sigil, Bridge Warden's Crest, and most importantly, Burden of the Audacious. Like I mentioned in my ring tier list, this ring has a certain bug that makes it exponentially more powerful if you partially invest into triage. The closer you get to 0% healing effectiveness, the more effective the heal. At 9 points of triage, the ring effectively full heals you when procced. I think you can see where this is going. When you run Crisis Core and Burden of the Audacious with 9 points of triage, you have a build that instantly full heals you every 3 seconds. This leaves your other 3 ring slots, the rest of your trait points, and the entire prism completely up to you. It's by far one of the most broken things I've ever seen in this game, and that's saying something when we have Monolith. Gunslinger's Charm increases fire rate by 15% and reload speed by 25%. Short, sweet, and to the point. It's hard to go wrong with more fire rate and reload speed. With haste being able to reach 10% or more with perception and the legendary bonus, it is slightly less valuable, but it's still a fantastic pick on most gun builds. Some weapons may not need it, and there are other ways of instantly reloading, but when you need a general boost to your weapons, you can't go wrong equipping this amulet. Worn Dog Tags increases fire rate and reload speed by 15% and decreases weapon charge time by 15%. Hey look, it's Gunslinger's Charm for charge weapons. This one is a little less necessary, mainly due to the fact that hitting the cap isn't that hard. Most sources of charge speed in the game give a pretty good chunk. That being said, this necklace is not actually that much worse than Gunslinger's. The only stat it's worse in is reload speed. I think that's a pretty good trade for being able to use this with both regular and charge weapons. Short Circuit. While a shield is active, increases critical chance and critical damage by 10%, and skill cooldowns are reduced by 6% once every 5 seconds. This is by far my favorite shield necklace. One thing I fail to realize in my ring tier list is that the cooldown reduction from sources like Sapphire Dreamstone is based on the base cooldown time of your skills. That 100-second cooldown skill will have 4 seconds shaved off per proc even when at the skill cooldown cap, effectively making Sapphire Dreamstone reduce cooldowns by 20% at 80% cooldown speed. This is why I'm in love with this amulet. Once every 5 seconds when a shield is up, your cooldowns get reduced by 6% of a skill's base cooldown, effectively 30% when at the cap. This makes skill spam with Invoker incredibly easy, and if you run the cooldown legendary bonus, you can legitimately infinitely spam War Stomp, Quick Draw, and Way of Keula. On top of that, you also gain a nice crit chance and crit damage boost, all for the small price of having a bit of active shield. 0 Hour increases all damage by 20% and critical chance by 10%. Each weight class above light reduces all damage bonus by 5% and critical chance by 2.5%. A simple all damage and crit chance boost for being lightweight. If you're dead set on rocking anything above, however, I'd suggest looking elsewhere. While being lightweight usually means having less defenses, you can always run a naked build and gain armor or DR from your traits, trinkets, concoctions, and prism. It's also not incredibly difficult to gain some decent DR even with the lighter armor sets. Alternatively, you can use weight and threshold reduction sources to shift some medium and heavy setups into light. With enough tweaking, you'll find the right playstyle this amulet can fit in. It's also worth mentioning that there's an odd bug that occasionally causes the values to not update when changing weight classes. Simply unequipping and re-equipping the amulet fixes this. Nightmare Spiral. Gain 10% of base range damage dealt as lifesteal. Reduces healing effectiveness by 95%. This might just be my favorite lifesteal trinket in the game. 10% flat lifesteal on guns is really good. Leech makes it hit 15%. Toss in some other lifesteal trinkets like Bloodless King's Vow and Siphon and you'll be healing a ton of health with each shot. The healing effectiveness reduction is severe, but if you're running this necklace, you're fully committed to lifesteal. Profane Heart is the best pick with this necklace for obvious reasons, although you could go with Siphon Heart if you really wanted to. Samoflange. Direct damage taken from enemies grants an additional 60% damage reduction for 5 seconds. Once the defensive buff expires, all incoming damage to wearer is increased by 15% for 10 seconds. I've always appreciated this necklace for providing such a massive and easily accessible defensive boost while not being straight up overpowered. Unless you're face tanking or trying to not get hit at all, this amulet can help you hit the DR cap effortlessly. Many light and medium sets benefit tremendously from wearing it, seeing huge jumps in their total DR. Heavy and above sets already have a lot of base armor DR, and therefore don't really need it. But if you can manage to hit 50 armor DR, then throwing this on alone with nothing else will let you hit the cap. Heavier sets do also have the benefit of making the DR penalty after being hit not as detrimental due to the sheer amount of their base armor DR. There is a visual bug in the Advanced Stats tab that doesn't show the DR before you get hit, but it is there. The effect lasting 5 seconds after being hit is great for protecting against follow-up attacks. It also seems to sometimes show a way higher total DR calculation for some reason, but I believe it's just visual. Many bosses have multi-hit attacks that can be severely softened by wearing this necklace. The 10-second debuff afterwards is also not really that punishing. If you often find yourself only getting hit once or twice in a fight, this amulet gives you a lot of freedom for picking your other traits, trinkets, prism, etc., since you won't need to worry about investing in other defense options. Now, if you're a magnet for boss attack kit boxes, you might want to stick to some other necklaces. In the right hands, however, this is absolutely one of the best defensive trinkets. Zero Divide. Gain infinite reserve ammo and increases range damage by 15%. This amulet arguably shouldn't be an excellent, however, there are a few things that I think make it better than the other reload/ammo related necklaces on this list. First off, it actually gives you a damage bonus. Unlike Security Lanyard, Quantum Memory, and Void Idol, the damage bonus is also permanent, unlike Moonstone. Secondly, it's better than Void Idol in that it straight up gives unlimited ammo, therefore making it more worth running with both instant reloads and passive reloading from Provisioners and Transpose. Void Idol, as we'll get to later, encourages manual reloading from the huge reload speed bonus it grants. Quantum Memory allows you to instant reload on command, but is a little clunky and relies on your archetype and rings to fill in for damage. This amulet surpasses all of them by giving a bit of damage while also working well with manual, instant, and passive reloading. It's also a random Naru drop, making it one of the best trinkets you can find in the early game, especially in hardcore runs. And for the third and final point, it grants you infinite ammo. Now, unlimited ammo in the late game isn't that impressive, since you'll eventually be able to just spam ammo boxes. However, it still does hold some value. Not needing to pop ammo boxes means you're saving some time during fights. How many times have you tried to use an ammo box, but some random enemy or even the boss kept forcing you to dodge repeatedly? This amulet prevents that situation from ever happening. Now, with good positioning and game sense, you'll know when it's safe to use an ammo box. And investing in Glutton and other consumable U-speed sources does make the animation go by faster. Even then, there's still a bit of time that you aren't dealing damage in a fight. Zero Divide is a simple, yet highly effective necklace that isn't truly necessary at higher levels of play, but works well with all forms of reloading, which can't be said about all of the other related amulets. Now it's time to move on to the section with the most amount of amulets. Very good. Nightweaver's Grudge. Gain 15% critical chance and haste when within 20 meters of an entity suffering from a status effect. If this necklace still gave 20%, I'd have placed it an excellent. 15% crit chance and haste is still pretty good though. Statuses are something you should almost always be applying in fights unless you're up against an elemental resistant boss. In those cases, corrosive still makes them take 10% more damage, and you can still use other statuses on them while just eating the damage loss. If you don't feel like running statuses, you can always apply a status to yourself or your friends. Simply set yourself or an ally on fire, or have one of you wear Atonement Folds to have it proc at all times. Like all trinkets that give haste, this one was made slightly less valuable due to the addition of Light Extract. It's still incredibly easy to maintain at all times, but it's worth bringing up. I hope you aren't getting tired of me talking about this yellow piss syringe because it's going to come up several more times on this list. Broken Pocket Watch. Increases stamina regeneration by 25 and reduces stamina cost by 50%. This amulet provides an absolutely incredible boost to your stamina. 25 flat stamina regen is almost as good as the recovery trait. This is hands down one of the best survivability options in Remnant 2, especially in the early game. All 4 weight tiers benefit from it. Light gains double dodge rolls, medium gets a 25% reduction, heavy has no penalty, and ultra just has a 25% stamina penalty. And if you run challenger, medium and above's numbers only get better. Being able to roll and utilize melee charge attacks more often is amazing. The only reason why it isn't higher is because it gets completely beaten out by Bisected Ring. God, that ring is just so busted. Besides that, this is a really great amulet. K9 Keepsake. Increases all damage by 2.5%, critical chance by 1.5%, and critical damage by 1.5% for every 5% of total health present as Grey Health, max 10 stacks. This amulet is one of the best Grey Health trinkets in the game, and in my opinion, is the best Grey Health necklace. When maxed out, it gives 25% total damage as well as 15% crit chance and crit damage. It's like if a 25% damage neck and Abrasive Whetstone had a baby. Like all babies, however, this one needs some maintenance. Thankfully, we have the tools at hand to do so, mainly in the form of Broken Heart and Ring of Phantom Pain. This combo ensures you'll have the max Grey Health needed for the necklace at all times. Sometimes it seems to get stuck at 9 stacks, presumably because Broken Heart's effect places you a pixel over 50%. Going below half and regenerating will correctly give you the max stacks, thankfully. You could also just run Restriction Cord in place of Broken Heart if you want to run an alternative relic like Shielded Heart. It's also one of the 8 amulets that grants Misty Step when ran with Ring of Omens. Not a bad match either, as the constant dodging could help you build and maintain the Grey Health. Whichever method you use to proc it, K9 Keepsake proves that Grey Health builds can be really powerful when properly built for. Kinetic Shield Exchanger. While a shield is active, gain 25% mod damage and generate 30% additional mod power. Back when Archon gave double mod power generation, this amulet was alright, but definitely outclassed by other options. In the modern day, it's actually really good. Shields are as common as breathable air, especially when using Shield Alternator, making the requirement not that hard to meet. 25% more mod damage is already pretty good. 30% extra mod generation on top of that really makes you question why the hell Mariner is the way it is. Not much else to it, it's just a good boost to both, and a fantastic pick in Archon Warden setups. Hollowed Egg. Spending at least 30% of a firearm's magazine to deal damage increases melee damage by 10% for 7 seconds, stacks 5 times. The best part of this necklace by far is that it only loses 1 stack at a time. By utilizing single-shot weapons like the Widowmaker, crossbow, and especially the Arballists, you can gain 3 or more stacks by just firing once. 50% more melee damage on a necklace is absolutely nuts, and while the 7-second duration might make it seem like it would cause some annoyance in the reloading department, we can just run the Hidden Power Mutator, or Provisioner's Ring to passively reload our main enablers while melee attacking. In the right hands, this necklace is a force to be reckoned with. If it weren't for Butcher's Fetish being as good as it is, I'd have placed this in excellent. Matriarch's Insignia. Increases melee damage by 35% and causes all successful melee attacks to restore 10 stamina. It grants a great boost to melee damage as well as a method of stamina replenishment. The latter can be exploited by charge attacks with multiple hits or by melees with large AoE effects. Sadly, as we all know, stamina management is as simple as equipping a single ring and calling it a day. However, this necklace allows you to utilize rerouting cable for easy shield gain with effectively no downside, as you'll always be getting stamina back from your melee attacks. When you need a solid pick for a melee necklace, you can't really go wrong with this one. Cost of Betrayal. Reduces relic charges to 1. Increases all damage by 25% when wearer has 1 relic charge. Increases incoming damage by 25% when wearer has no relic charge. After 15 seconds of having no relic charges, regain 1 relic charge. Originally, I was going to place this amulet in Excellent, but after some consideration, I think the risky situations it can put you in bumps it down a little. I personally love running it. It's almost the Burden of the Destroyer of the Amulet slot. However, the downside is punishing enough where it can actually affect you harshly if you aren't careful. Only having one relic charge can be severely hindering to the average player. If you're in co-op, it can easily get your friends killed if it's active when they go down. The same goes for your dog if you have Handler as your primary archetype. Similar to Camouflage, once the necklace procs, you have to avoid attacks for a little while, lest you get clipped by something that'll have an easier time one-shotting you now. This does mean certain relics like Crystal or Constrained Heart have their defensive benefits completely removed to make up for the DR penalty. I especially wouldn't run Crystal Heart with the necklace, as you're typically going to want to avoid incoming attacks for the next 15 seconds instead of slowing down and trying to face tank. The one upside to this mechanic is that once it's over, you get your relic charge back. 15 seconds is a lot faster than emergency switches cooldown. You also can't run out of relic charges completely like you can accidentally do with emergency switch. It's definitely not the best pick for saving relic charges, but it can be a reliable way of getting them back if you're competent at dodging. Read of the Vaunt. Activating a mod increases mod generation by 15% for 10 seconds. Mod charges have 20% chance to not be consumed on use. On its own, I think this amulet is realistically a decent tier option. When paired with the right mods and mutators, however, it can really shine. Feedback with Prismatic Driver and this necklace will give you near unlimited charges, which is pretty busted when you boost your explosive and mod damage. It also stacks additively with Failsafe, giving you a 35% chance to refund a mod charge on cast. Here's a neat fact about Failsafe, Read of the Vaunt, and mods that consume one or more charges on cast. Each charge consumed on cast rolls the chance separately. Big Bang, for example, consumes 5 charge on a full cast. With both Failsafe and Read, your chance of getting a full refund is slightly more than 0.5%, or 1 in 200. Pretty unlikely, but even getting 2 or even 3 charges back can be very helpful for mod uptime, even if your chances for that happening are 12 and 4% respectively. That's why I prefer to run the necklace with multi-charge automatic mods like Prismatic Driver. Now you might be getting the idea to run Failsafe and this to potentially have back-to-back uses of bullet mods. Unfortunately, they don't work with active mods. You're better off just running Leaking Gemstone instead if you want to loop active mods. With most basic mods, it's alright, but in the right setup, it enables some ridiculous shenanigans. Indignant Fetish. Taking damage from any source increases all damage by 20% and reduces all incoming damage by 10%. Lasts 15 seconds. When this procced off of only enemy attacks, I still thought it was good. Now it's activated on any incoming damage with a slightly smaller power boost. We all know by now how easy it is to apply self-damage, be it fire, atonement fold, friendly fire, what have you. An essentially permanent 20% all damage and 10% DR buff is nothing to scoff at. I personally prefer running this over something like Whispering Marble. Decayed Margin. Melee hits gain 3% base damage dealt as lifesteal. For each 25% missing health, gain 3% additional melee lifesteal. When health is full, gain 35% melee damage. If Dying Ember didn't exist, I'd place this amulet in Excellent. Since its values were buffed, it's certainly a lot stronger on its own now though. I'd say run one or the other, both is a little overkill. This necklace has the upside of providing a whopping 12% melee lifesteal when at a quarter of life, making any charged swing heal a ton of health. The effect is weaker with multi-hit melee attacks like those from the Scythe, but you're also getting more hits per charged swing, especially with Harvester. The bonus damage is just icing on the cake. If you're face tanking with this necklace, you'll likely have gaps where the effect isn't up, but as long as you stay on the offensive, you'll be fine. Detonation Trigger. Increases explosion damage by 25%. Explosions apply 165 to 495 burning damage over 5 seconds. The explosive class's bread and butter amulet. Extra blast damage and constant burn dot application makes this a powerful option for explosive builds. If, for whatever reason, you don't want to invest into crits, Burden of the Excavator is a good match for this necklace, pushing your raw blast damage even further, allowing certain weapons and explosive sources to hit additional enemy health thresholds. The only reason why it's in this tier is because Volatile Cartridge is a more impactful explosive trinket, mainly due to the bug. Crits are just more worth it with explosives anyway. Wrecking Ball and Power Fantasy alone make not running crits with explosives the inferior pick in my eyes. However, if you're on console, or don't want to go through the Prism grind, Detonation Trigger will serve you well. Void Idol. Increases reload speed by 30%. Reloads only require 50% of magazine from reserves to fully reload. Despite Zero Divide providing more flexibility when it comes to other reload-related sources, I'm still quite fond of this one. 30% is a huge boost, and you're going to need it with your now double ammo capacity. Only needing half the required bullets per reload means double effective ammo, which scales multiplicatively with additional reserve sources by the way. Depending on how you play and what your build entails, this might be the better pick over Zero Divide. Weapons that have low max ammo and need to be reloaded often like Spore Bloom and the Double Barrel greatly benefit from Void Idol, and while the amulet encourages manual reloading, it does actually benefit from passive and instant reloading sources like Provisioners and Bypass Primer. That being said, if you want to run either of those, you should just use Zero Divide instead. Both options are impactful and enjoyable in their own manner. Daredevil's Charm. Gain 7.5% to all damage dealt and 3.75% movement speed for each empty armor slot. Before the Prism system update, this would have been in niche tier, but since the release of the final DLC, it's very easy to gain a lot of DR and armor even while being naked. Even if you don't want to do the grind, it's very manageable to stack enough pure DR to match even some of the lighter armor sets. If you do walk the Prism path however, steel plating with a perfect set of fragments tends to yield more DR than Impervious. That leaves you with a good movement speed boost and a big total damage bonus. If it were easier for all parties to work with Prisms, this would be an excellent tier. The next 3 amulets revolve around the Expose status effect. I've ordered them based on how impactful and easy they are to apply compared to one another. Echo Chamber increases explosive damage by 10% and AoE size by 25. Inflicting explosive damage applies exposed for 5 seconds, max 15 seconds. I consider this to be the easiest one to work with. You just hit enemies with explosive damage and apply exposed. On top of that, you also get an awesome 25% AoE size increase, boosting not only your blast radius but your skill range and aura size to boot. There's a lot of explosive damage sources in Remnant too, making this necklace a fantastic enabler for your exposed trinkets, your overall damage, and your teammates' damage as well. The extra AoE size could potentially get you killed with certain weapons and mods, so it's best to invest into kinship to reduce the chances of that happening. Birthright of the Lost increases all damage by 10%. On perfect dodge, apply exposed on the attacker and enemies within 4 meters of the wearer for 15 seconds. For some reason, the wiki says the range on the exposed application is 3 meters, but in-game it displays 4 and gets boosted to 6 when amplitude is leveled, so I'm inclined to believe my own eyes. It's effectively a 25% damage neck, making it better than a lot of other necklaces on this list. If you aren't able to dodge due to weight, I seriously recommend using Echo Chamber or running Monolith if you're desperate to apply the status. Fragrant Thorn increases status effect damage by 20. Inflicting 4 or more unique status effects on a target applies exposed for 15 seconds. Chances are, if you're running this necklace, you're also running Miasma Ritualist. However, you can still hit the 4 status effect requirement fairly easy with the right combination of weapons, mods, and mutators. Slow can be a good choice if you run Time Weaver, Binding Orbs, or one of the few mods that applies it. Even unique debuffs like Banish from Repulsor count towards the Expose. Once you get all 4 statuses on one enemy, you can actually reapply the Exposed by refreshing one of their existing statuses. I get why this necklace buffs status damage, but we already have multiple that improve their damage way more. I kinda wish it increased status duration instead, at least then it'd be more unique. Magnifying Glass increases skill and mod duration by 30%, and their AoE and aura sizes by 20%. When this amulet was first added, I was incredibly excited to play with another AoE boosting source. Realistically, it isn't that amazing, but it's got solid stats all around. It helps with mod uptime, skill looping for Medic and Alchemist, and widening the range for powerful abilities like Way of Geula, Redemption, etc. When you level Chakra and Gifted, you're hitting 60% increased duration for your mods and skills. It goes without saying, Archon is a perfect match for this necklace, although most archetypes can benefit greatly from its boosts. Necklace of Supremacy. After 5 seconds of not being damaged, increases all damage dealt by 15%. If health is full, damage bonus increases to 30%. If you never get hit, this amulet is great. If you do, however, it can be a little frustrating to work with. Thankfully, it has a merciful 5-second reactivation timer, unlike Clear Halo's 10-second eternity. Speaking of unlike Vestige of Power in the ring slot, this grants a total damage boost. Not much else to say about Supremacy. It's a necklace for perfectionists. Difference Engine. While a shield is active, all damage is increased by 20%, and 4.5% of base damage dealt is returned as lifesteal. I was of the opinion this necklace was kind of good before its lifesteal was buffed. Now that it's a base 4.5%, it's really good. If you don't like the downside of Nightmare Spiral, try this one out instead. Make sure to toss in Siphon, Leech, and Profane Heart for good measure. Hitting nearly 16% total lifesteal is pretty damn good. 21% if you pop Profane Heart. That lets you heal a good chunk of health from every personal damage source. You can even weave in passive regen as well, unlike Nightmare Spiral. If you're looking for a good lifesteal necklace, this is one you definitely shouldn't pass up. Full Moon Circlet. Range damage lifesteals 3% base damage dealt. At full health, range damage is increased by 25%. The decayed margin of the ranged variety, minus the scaling bonus. This amulet is short, sweet, and to the point. It also grants Misty Step when ran with Ring of Omens. However, I find it to be the worst of the 8 pairings. Since dodging turns health into gray health, you'll often lose your range damage bonus. Granted, it can be mended by your lifesteal, another fine substitute for Nightmare Spiral. Energy Diverter. While a shield is active, gain 10% critical chance and 15% to all damage dealt. This amulet is like Difference Engine but more damage oriented. 15% total damage isn't a lot, but when paired with the 10% more crit chance, it can pull its own weight, so long as the build around it is made accordingly. Hyperconductor. Doubles base skill charges but increases all skill cooldowns by 25%. Doubles base Nerudian energy reserves for turret and drone. This necklace is an example of how to properly balance a trinket with longer skill cooldowns as a downside. Having double base skill charges can be a massive time saver, allowing you to knock out a boss or wave of enemies that much sooner. You can run it with damaging skills like War Stomp and Quick Draw, however I think there are better choices out there for skill spam. On skills like Bulletstorm, Hunter's Mark, Rampage, etc., being able to pop one immediately after the first one ends will do wonders for maintaining your heightened DPS. The only real downside to running this, besides the obvious cooldown penalty, is that you can just run Invoker if you want the same effect with no downside. This amulet does grant more Nerudian energy than Invoker, but Band of Ordnance plus some skill cooldown is a much more effective method of extending your tech uptime. Devloop can also provide unlimited skill uptime with a high crit build. With all that said, I still think this necklace can be very good in the right setup. Lemire Sensor. Increases mod duration by 50%. Increases mod cost by 10%. When combined with Chakra and Zohe's Ring, you can achieve double mod duration. The increased mod cost is so minuscule that it's practically not there. Increased mod duration pairs exceptionally well with Leaking Gemstone, allowing you to gain even more mod power back during active mods. Throw on feedback and you'll be permalooping active mods no problem. Talisman of the Sun. Increases fire damage by 25% and burning damage by 50%. Easily the best of the elemental necklaces in my eyes. As we discussed in the ring tier list, fire is the most prominent element in the player's arsenal, especially on Starshot, where this amulet shines the most. Increasing what is already the strongest dot in Remnant 2 by 75% is pretty damn good, and on everything else fire related it never misses the mark. It's also a Misty Step enabler. Sinister Totem. Applying or refreshing a negative status effect to an enemy increases status damage by 1% for 15 seconds, max 50 stacks. When it comes to Miasma Ritualist builds, this is easily the best necklace for pure status damage. All stacks are drained at once, but as long as you have an Elemental Bullet mod or Mutator, you'll never run the timer down. Ever since Miasma was nerfed, this amulet has dropped a little bit in value, but it can still hold its own, making your constant waves of statuses pack a stronger punch. Energized Neck Coil. Increases status effect damage by 20%. Directly applying a damaging status effect creates a 2-meter explosion for 20% of its full damage. Each target can be affected once every 5 seconds. I am a huge fan of this amulet. It turns your dots into high-powered explosives. Weapons like Nebula and Hellfire become mob-shredding machines. Popping upwards of 3k damage by just puffing Nebula can even let you cheese some bosses if you play your cards right. If you grab Power Fantasy or Wrecking Ball from the Prism system, they'll be even more deadly. When a necklace is designed to be built around and reward you handsomely for doing so, that's a good-ass necklace. Twisted Idol. Increases armor effectiveness by 35% and reduces encumbrance by 20%. While it doesn't give as much armor as Fortify, this amulet drops Leto's Mark 1 to heavyweight and can improve many more to medium or light. 35% more armor will net you somewhere between 5.5% to 7.5% armor DR if you don't have Fortify, and a 4.5 to 5% bonus if you do. With Leto's Mark 1, you only need about 28% more DR to hit the cap with both, which is quite easy to achieve. If you're looking for an easy way to enable Leto's face tanking, look no further. Vengeance Idol. Increases all damage dealt by 30% when the wearer's health is below 50%. If you want to do a half-health build and don't want to be forced to run Ring of Phantom Pain for Canine Keepsake, this is your next best option. I'd personally rather run Canine Keepsake, but I can appreciate that this one at least gives more total damage. Plus, you don't have to worry about preserving gray health when you do get hit. Downward Spiral. Increases fire rate by 10% and melee attack speed by 15%. For every missing 10% of max health, gain 4% range damage, max 20%, and 5% melee damage, max 25%. This is basically Vengeance Idol, but for Gun Fu players. The melee side is especially strong, giving a good damage boost and a great melee speed boost to boot. While Canine Keepsake is still the stronger option, I can't deny how fun this amulet is to run. Neckbone Necklace reduces the damage of status effects applied to the wearer by 50%. Gain 25% increased damage when suffering from a status or blight effect. While it's not super common to be afflicted by a damaging status effect in a boss fight, in the overworld the reduced damage taken from them can be kinda nice. Although realistically half of them can be dealt with by dodging, the other two are worth cleansing ASAP via consumable or perks. The main reason why I'll be running this, however, is the 25% all damage bonus, Atonement Fold and Self-Immolation being great methods of achieving permanent uptime. Emergency Switch. When below 50% health, chance to consume relic on use is reduced by 50%. Final relic charge is not consumed on use, but effect cannot be triggered again for 30 seconds. Before this amulet and conversion seal were buffed, I would have rated this much lower. Since both have been buffed to 50% chance to not consume a relic charge when at half health, they are incredibly fun to run together. You can pretty safely run Enlarged Heart to fully heal yourself whenever you go below half health, which on Apocalypse is gonna happen a lot. The secondary effect can also be helpful if you do ever get down to that last relic charge, but I feel it's better to prevent that situation from ever happening in the first place. Curry Curry Charm. For every 10% of health missing, max 50%, gain 10% increased relic use speed and 7% chance to not consume a relic charge. Here we have Emergency Switch 2, the sequel that gives less chance to not consume a relic but also a huge relic use speed boost. Honestly, it's down to personal preference and relic choice when it comes to choosing to run either necklace. Both are good, and an 85% chance to not consume a relic is almost as good as infinite relics. Tossing in Glutton pushes your consume speed even further, making it even more enticing with some relics. Gunfire Security Lanyard automatically reloads magazine over time, does not work for single shot weapons. This amulet is the closest you're gonna get to a trinket that increases magazine size. Its passive reload speed is based on the magazine size of your weapons. The more rounds in the mag, the faster it works. Extender and the Size Matters legendary bonus will dramatically improve the necklace's effectiveness. What's better than reloading faster? Never having to reload at all, at least sometimes. Weapons like the Scattergun passively reload fairly quickly with their base fire rate. Obviously, the more you invest into making your gunfire faster, the less total extra rounds you're going to squeeze out of this amulet. It's more noticeable with automatic weapons in that department though. I highly recommend messing around to find your favorite setup with this necklace. Legacy Protocol reduces skill cooldowns by 20% and increases skill duration by 15%. While other trinkets may have it beat in the realm of aggressive skill cooldowns, sometimes a big flat bonus is all you really need. With Expertise, you're pushing 40%, add in Xenoplasm to hit 50%, a Fragment sets you to 60%, then you have several rings to help you hit the cooldown cap. It doesn't discourage you from running Sapphire Dreamstone either, since you can absolutely crank out those cooldowns with the right setup. The small duration bonus is nice, but 15% more than likely won't make a difference with most skills. Of course, investing in Gifted lets you hit 45%, which is absolutely worth pursuing if you're running 2 active skills. Golden Ribbon increases mod damage by 25%. Activating a mod grants haste for 15 seconds. This necklace is definitely closer to decent than it is very good, but I'd be lying if I said I don't still equip it from time to time. In a proper Archon setup, you'll more than likely have the haste effect up at all times, saving you from occasionally having to pop a light extract. Besides that, there's not much else to say about this amulet.
It does exactly what it says on the tin.
Moonstone increases reload speed by 15%. Every third manual reload will reload both firearms and increases range damage by 15% for 10 seconds. Let me start off by saying I completely downplayed how effective this necklace can actually be in my ring tier list. I say it's not that amazing, which is true, but it's actually a ton of fun to play with. The reason why it's actually kind of good is that the trinket's description is a lie. The passive stowed weapon reload doesn't proc every 3 reloads, but every 2, with a small asterisk. The first proc needs 3 manual reloads, while each subsequent proc only needs 2. I don't know what kind of jank in the code causes this to happen, but it honestly should be 2 instead. It's far more effective and fun that way. The damage bonus is small, but the bug does let it proc more frequently. I prefer to run this amulet with 1 slow reloading weapon and a swift reloading one. The gameplay loop becomes proc the effect, swap to the slower reloading gun, when the buff runs out, swap back to the other one to proc it again. It's a bit of work for a not so amazing upside, but it's certainly not as bad as I initially thought it was. It's also one of the 8 Misty Step enablers. Exhaust Valve increases heat decay rate by 25%, and weapons that generate heat no longer overheat. At max heat, fire rate is reduced by 20%. For a good while, I considered this amulet to be excellent, but after some testing and reflection, I've come to realize it's good, but nowhere near as strong as I originally thought. I used to think this was a no-brainer pick for heat-based weapons, but it actually has the same problem as Tolerance Band in that it's a glorified set of training wheels for heat weapons. Although in this case, it also comes with a penalty of reduced fire rate when at max heat. There's a reason why it also increases heat decay rate rate. The only case where you want to stay at max heat is if you're running constant variable ring, which effectively negates the DPS loss from the Amulet's penalty. The only problem with this is that you could just not overheat your gun and run a damage necklace instead. If you really want heat management in your build, Microcompressor and Ingenuity are right there. There's also the case for running superheated with it, which is absolutely the best use case for the necklace, allowing the powerful blast to proc every 3 seconds. Outside of that setup, however, it's just alright. Starting off at the top of decent, Ravager's Mark. Increases all damage dealt to bleeding targets by 20%. Bonus increases to 30% for targets with 50% or lower health. In my first draft of the list, I had placed this in very good. However, I bumped it down when I considered the other damage necklaces in that tier. It's incredibly easy to proc, which is good, however, it only jumping up to 30% isn't impactful enough to warrant running it over something like one of the crit necklaces. Abrasive Whetstone alone is a far better necklace choice for a bleed build. You could also just run one of the 25% damage necklaces instead and have a consistent damage bonus from the get-go. It's not at all bad. When the bonus kicks in, it is a nice little boost. Plus, it's also a Misty Step enabler, so it's got that going for it. Nimue's Ribbon. Increase relic healing effectiveness by 50%, activating a relic grants haste for 25 seconds. If you ever wanted to make Resonating Heart have an even stronger heal over time, look no further. In general though, leveling Triage is usually gonna be enough to make whatever heart you're using fully heal you. If you're playing full support medic however, it can be a nice way of squeezing more healing out of Burden of the Divine. Although nowadays with the Physician Legendary bonus it isn't as needed. That being said, the necklace is still good, the long-lasting haste it grants is also appreciated, even if Flight Extract does the same thing for longer. The next 3 amulets are what I like to call, I don't know what I want to do with my build yet picks. Participation Medal. Increase health by 10, stamina by 10, movement speed by 10%, and damage reduction by 10%. I was almost tempted to place this at the bottom of very good. It gives a nice boost to 4 different stats, and as you probably know, the effects increase by 1 and 1% after eating a fruit slice, or dried fruit or whatever. It's definitely the best of this little bunch in my opinion. Flat health and DR on a necklace with move speed, not too shabby. These next 2 are nearly identical. They both provide max health, stamina, and reduced armor encumbrance. The rusted variant trades 5 of the 2 former for the latter. When it comes to picking one over the other, the most impactful factor is undoubtedly the armor you're wearing. Both can drop you a weight class when strong back is leveled, with the rusted having a slight edge with some armor combinations. They also both provide 15 blight resistance when worn with the Navigator's Helm, but for some reason they gave the Navigator's Helm -1 blight res, so it's more like plus 14. Also points to the rusted variant for not just being a straight up burst version of the clean one, unlike a certain amulet later on this list. Necklace of Flowing Life. Increases Grey Health conversion by an additional 100%. When Grey Health conversion triggers, gain 5 times the amount as mod power. The best part of this necklace in my mind is that it fully converts all the damage you take into Grey Health. It makes using bandages an instant heal, so long as you aren't getting hit again or becoming corroded. The mod power conversion from Grey Health isn't too bad either. If you were to take 100 damage and live, you'd gain a minimum of 500 mod power to both mods. Using Ring of Phantom Pain, Restriction Cord, and Bandages can provide a decent amount of passive mod generation. It's certainly a lot better than Reprocessed Art, which is just straight up broken, but we'll get to that in the relic tier list. The reason why this necklace isn't higher up is simply due to the fact that Reaction Chain is just the best mod generation necklace. That, and if you want the most bang for your buck, you need to either take damage from enemies or manually convert your health to Grey Health. Using Burden of the Warlock and a rapid fire mod like Prismatic Driver lets you quickly turn your bar completely grey. This does provide a substantial amount of mod power, but it's highly risky, and without bandages you'll have to rely on other healing sources to not instantly die. It's also one of the Misty Step enabling necklaces, and one of the better ones at that. It makes your dodges generate 75 or more mod power. Overall, it's a solid necklace that rewards risky maneuvers with a good amount of mod power. Quantum Memory. Combat Slide reloads currently equipped firearm. Perfect Dodge Combat Slide reloads both firearms. Right off the bat, the best thing about this necklace is that it does in fact provide an instant on-demand reload by just sliding. Even the ultra heavyweight class benefits from it, since slides are the same across all classes. The worst part of this necklace is that sliding only grants 7 iframes, the absolute lowest out of any form of evasion. This makes proccing the secondary effect quite challenging. When you do get it, it's awesome, but Remnant 2 sliding is kinda janky, especially if you don't have any evade speed or window. This amulet also has some quirks with its instant reload that Bypass Primer does not. The first one is a bit pointless, but I tested it anyway. Outcast Ring gets 2 stacks per reload with single shot weapons, which is very strange. The second oddity is that the reload on Slide won't proc some on reload sources like Outcast Ring and Digested Hog Lure unless bullets are actually reloaded. It's strange because Shiny Hog Lure does not have the same issue with Quantum Memory. I'd say if you want instant reloads in your build, just stick with Bypass Primer, which will always proc each on reload source regardless if either of your weapons actually reload on perfect dodge. Also, it's in the ring slot, which is very hard to beat. Ankh of Power grants 15% increase to all damage. Consuming a relic increases the bonus to 25% for 15 seconds. I kind of wish Gunfire never nerfed this amulet. It was a go-to pick for a ton of builds back in the day. Nowadays it's fine, although many of the necklaces added with the DLCs have overshadowed it in effectiveness. If you're looking for a filler 25% damage necklace, you could do a lot worse. Onyx Pendulum. Dealing 100 base firearm damage, adds stacks, which multiplies the damage of stowed firearm by 1.02 times for 15 seconds, stacks 10 times. When Gunfire changed this necklace to be a multiplicative damage source, I was kind of excited. Up to that point, we had mostly been starved for intentional non-crit multi-sources. Once I tried it out, I didn't immediately notice anything radically different. I proceeded to put it away and not touch it for about 4 months. Now that I've played with it some more, mostly comparing it to a standard 25% damage necklace, I can safely say it's slightly better than one. Since it's considered a unique damage bucket, it relies on your other bonuses to be effective. At worst, the necklace was about 4% better, and with a super juiced setup, it was a little over 10%. TLDR, it's only a slight upgrade from a standard 25% damage necklace if you aren't running a lot of raw damage. Considering it's also a necklace that needs constant maintenance, I'd honestly just prefer the flat bonus. Chains of Amplification increases all damage dealt to targets suffering from a status effect by 20%. Like I mentioned earlier, in most fights, you're more than likely going to be applying some sort of status effect in some shape or form, whether it be Corrosion, Slow, Exposed, or one of the more unique ones like Banish from Repulsor. This amulet is a low maintenance, medium damage boost that can be slapped on literally any build. If it gave some sort of bonus to statuses, like a bit of duration, I'd consider it very good. Soul Anchor. Increase all damage by 20% while at least one summon is active. This necklace is like chains, but with summons instead of statuses. If you're playing Summoner, Handler, Engineer, or Warden, you'll practically always have this up. You could also run one of the summon mods like Knight's Guard or Root Tentacles if you don't want to be restricted to your archetype choices. Another good low maintenance option for a damage necklace. Shade Bloom Crystal. Gain a 35% damage bonus. Every 5 seconds, the bonus switches between physical and elemental damage. This amulet provides a substantial flip-flopping damage boost that when played into, can be pretty powerful. The major problem I have is how restrictive it can be when it comes to build making. You'll need to have at least one of both damage types in your build, which isn't necessarily hard, but your options aren't exactly bountiful. There are 2 long guns and 4 handguns that deal elemental damage with their primary fire. You don't necessarily have to pick them when using the necklace. You could just use melee or mods to fill in the elemental slot if you really wanted to. Personally, I'd rather run a flat 20 to 25% total damage necklace or even a specific elemental damage necklace with constant uptime and not have to bother swapping weapons to deal with the short 5-second timer. I'll admit that it can be better than the average necklace in the right hands, but those hands aren't mine. And before we move on, it's worth mentioning that this necklace's timer seems to always be counting down even when it's not equipped. My best guess is that the game has some sort of internal 5-second timer that's always running for various aspects of it. I should also mention that this was the OG physical damage boosting source before Breach Accelerator. Goes to show how often I use this trinket. Inert Overcharger. Standing completely still for 0.5 seconds increases fire rate by 20%, reload speed by 15%, and reduces recoil by 50%. Lasts 2 seconds after moving. While it can feel awesome to become a standing turret, I genuinely believe it's just better to run Gunslinger's Charm instead. Think about it statistically. With GC, you're getting 15% fire rate and 25% faster reloads. IO gives 20% fire rate and 15% faster reloads. Yeah, it also gives reduced recoil, but if you really want recoil reduction, you can just level handling. You can simply run Gunslinger's Charm and be getting basically the same if not better stats instead. That being said, the amulet is by no means useless. Thankfully, standing still for 0.5 seconds is very easy to do even in the heat of combat. At the absolute best, this amulet yields 5% more DPS than that of GC, and if that's worth it in your eyes, then go right ahead. I think it should be better than Gunslinger's Charm, at least a little bit, to make it worth choosing in the right situations or builds. Cessation Bubble. Activating a mod consumes all current shield. For every 20 shield consumed, increases all damage dealt by 4% for 10 seconds, max 10 stacks. Out of all the necklaces whose stacks go away all at once, this really should not have been one of them. It relies on not only needing large quantities of shield, but also on having a charged mod every 10 seconds. Now you might think a simple solution would be to run Shield Alternator and use it in an Archon build. Well, unfortunately, for some reason, using it with Cessation Bulbul makes the shield granted on mod use immediately vanish and only grant 1 stack regardless of how much health it would have covered. Activating a mod also makes shield consumed from Clear Halo and Warden's Prime perk take the full 10 seconds to come back. You pretty much need to rely on other rings and mutators if you want a reliable source of shield income. You could use Shielded Heart, but unless you also have 200 max health, you'll only be gaining 7 stacks per pop. Not to mention you'll need to use one every 10 seconds on top of recharging your mod. The mods I had the most success with were Spore Bomb from Spore Bloom and Banish from Repulsor. Cheap and fast casting mods are a necessity when using this necklace. When you finally get into the flow, 40% damage rocks. It's almost like you're getting a base crit's worth of extra damage. If the stacks went down one at a time, it'd absolutely be in very good tier. As it stands now, you really gotta put in the effort to make it work, and not everything that should work with it does. Death's Embrace. Gain 15% to all damage when health is not completely full. When below 50% health, gain an additional 10% bonus to all damage and haste. Before Light Extract was added, I would have placed this in very good next to Vengeance Idol. Nowadays, it's more of a decent half-health filler necklace. It does enable Misty Step with Ring of Omens, which can actually be a good way of dipping below half health to proc the haste and extra damage bonus. Jester's Bell. Casting a mod or skill increases all damage by 15% for 20 seconds, increases cast speed by 35%. I think this amulet was fine when it gave 20% damage. Since you could proc it from mods and skills, it made the 15-second timer actually easy to manage. 15% damage for 20 seconds just feels worse. I guess it can support Havoc Form's entire duration with Gifted leveled. Outside of that though, it's not hard to hit the cast speed cap with most skills, and you can get higher damage boosts from mods and skills elsewhere. While not a bad amulet, it's definitely teetering on the edge of being niche. Beads of the Valorous. Increases damage reduction and movement speed by 1% for every 5% of missing max health. Bonus is doubled at or below 50% max health, max 10 stacks. As the only true half-health defensive necklace, it pains me to say it's just alright. The movement speed bonus is absolutely the best part about it. Half-health offensive builds? A-okay. Half-health defensive builds? Nowadays they're not as appealing. Prisms have made hitting the DR cap incredibly easy, meaning you can have your highest effective health at full health, rather than making half of your health try to achieve the same thing and fall short mathematically. At least the extra move speed can help you evade attacks in the first place. Spirit Wisp Amulet. Activating a mod reduces current skill cooldowns by 3% for every 300 mod power spent. Compared to the other two cooldown necklaces, this one is only really effective in one build, an Archon setup. Although when using Archon, your mods do become cheaper, which is usually a good thing, but when using this amulet it can cause issues. Mod cost reduction sources can potentially cause the effects of the necklace to be weaker, since the previous thresholds of 300 might not be met anymore. The wiki states it remembers mod power spent in total, but in my tests it only procced off of thresholds on single cast. If it did function that way, it'd be far better. In some non-Archon setups, it can be an alright cooldown neck pick. Its effectiveness heavily depends on your skills and mods. I prefer to run the bullet mods for a huge 12% cooldown burst on activation. It goes without saying that Leaking Gemstone works great with it, allowing for more mod pops sooner from the mod generation during active mods. Hangman's Noose. Restricts health to 50% and backfills with permanent grey health. All incoming damage is fully converted into grey health, and grey health cannot be removed. Another half grey health necklace. By default, this one has to be lower on the list simply because Canine Keepsake is such a powerful alternative. What are the upsides to this one? Well, you'll always have at least 50% of your health as grey, you can't lose grey health, and you're immune to the effects of corrosion on your grey health. It's an interesting concept, however I honestly think it needs something else to be a more enticing pick. You'll always gain the full power of Ring of the Damned, and a 25% crit damage boost from the Guts mutator, which is nice. However, both of these can be achieved by using Broken Heart and Ring of Phantom Pain. When running those two, you can also run Canine Keepsake, the best half-grey health trinket. Hangman's is an okay enabler for some elements of grey health builds, but it needs another stat, or some other mechanic to make it worth it. Leto's Amulet. Reduces encumbrance by 40%, and stamina cost by 35%. Lido's is an overkill solution for armor weight problems. You'll never have to worry about flopping when wearing this thing, and if you invest just 5 points into strong back, you'll be able to medium roll with Lido's Mark 1. Medium rolls with 10% cheaper stamina costs in the most tanky armor set in the game. Why isn't this amulet higher on my list? Well, I just personally think the other weight reducing amulets are stronger with the heftier sets. If you just want to shift down one weight tier, you can use Dull Steel Ring. Lido's Mark II with strong back and DSR lets you hit medium weight and still have an empty neck slot. If anything, I'd rather just run DSR and Pocket Watch instead. At least then I'm getting extra stamina regen and no stamina cost penalty with Ultra sets. Soulstone increases summon damage by 30% and summon movement speed by 30%. Summons have always been jank in Remnant 2, so deciding to go whole hog and invest heavily in their damage may not seem like the brightest idea. If you know me, you know I have a soft spot for summons, and after playing with the necklace for a good while, I think it's not really that bad. In a dual Reaver setup with Insight, Summoner can dish out some pretty decent damage. Other non-Summoner summons will also benefit from the amulet, like Hyperspeed Space Crabs and Knight's Guard Swords. And while I wouldn't recommend running it with Handler, their dog does get a nice movement speed boost that helps them rush down targets and teammates. It's bordering on niche, that's for sure, but it being enjoyable to run is what's keeping it up here. One True King Sigil increases mod damage by 20%, enhances the effect of Fey Rin and Fey Lin Sigil by 50% per sigil equipped. Looking back at my ring tier list, I think I rated Fey Lin Sigil a bit too high. I do admit, in the right hands, the necklace ring combo can put out some good mod power generation. After using it more for this video, however, I think it's a bit too much work to weave in melee attacks when you could otherwise invest in more passive mod gen or mod gen boosts. Out of respect, I'm leaving it at the bottom of decent, but it honestly deserves to be placed down with the rest of the mediocre necklaces. Starting off in weak/niche, we have Stone Shaper's Chisel. After not using the primary fire of a weapon for 10 seconds, all damage is increased by 25%. Primary fire of a weapon instantly cancels the effect. This is kind of a strange amulet. It rewards you for not shooting with a general damage bonus. This is fairly easy to do. Many builds can function perfectly well without firing their guns. Melee, Summoner, and some mod setups can benefit from this necklace. All you need to do is adjust your playstyle. That being said, it can feel really awkward not being allowed to fire your gun. Useful mutators like Fetid and Twisting Wounds are completely off the table, lest you incur the 10-second cooldown. Unlike one of the other 25% or higher damage amulets, you can't shoot your weapons without hurting the rest of your build. Because of that fact, I have to rate it lower. If the cooldown were 5 seconds or the bonus was higher, I'd find it more appealing. Toxic Release Valve. Swapping firearms releases a Toxic Cloud which deals 60.5 to 170.5 acid damage to all enemies within 7 meters, and applies Corrosion dealing 280 acid damage over 7 seconds. Can only happen once every 3 seconds. I was very tempted to place this in decent, and maybe with enough convincing I'd budge, but as it stands, TRV is the definition of a gimmick trinket. It allows you to deal acid damage and apply corrosion over a scalable radius every 3 seconds. It can deal a decent chunk of damage to and even stagger smaller enemies. The major problem is that it's easy to apply corrosion to a group of nearby enemies by just using Nebula, Fetid Wounds, Miasma, and even Corrosive Rounds. The best part of this necklace is that you can critical shit on people. Besides that, it's just the silly gimmick fart necklace. If it did something on top of its base effect, I'd feel more inclined to run it. Being in the necklace slot is what kills it the most. This could have totally been a ring instead. Gift of Melancholy. Increases all damage dealt by 25% when stamina is at 100% for 7 seconds. Another 25% damage necklace that requires you to not do something. In this case, it's a lot more restrictive than Stone Shaper's Chisel. At least with that amulet, you can dodge and run around. This one wants you to never spend stamina. 25% damage isn't worth needing to be on full stamina for 7 whole seconds. Yeah, you can run Bisected to always have unlimited stamina, but you can also just run a 25% damage necklace that doesn't have such a restrictive requirement. This should have no cooldown, and instead be up the second you're at full stamina. This could have been an interesting neck option. Instead, it's cursed to be a niche damage trinket. Brazen Amalgam. Increases critical chance by 1.5% and movement speed while aiming by 2.5% per second. Max 10 stacks. Dodge, slide, or flop remove stacks. I always thought you needed to aim down sights to build stacks with this necklace. All you need to do is stand around like you would with Power Complex. Just like Power Complex, dodging incurs the same unlisted delay before stacks start building again. Besides that, why is this amulet so low? I mean, it gives crit chance, right? As we discussed in the ring tier list, a trinket can boost crits, but that doesn't automatically make it good. In Brazen's case, you're only getting 15% crit chance, something you can get from several other necklaces for way less. The ADS move speed also doesn't make much of a difference. Footwork and Ring of the Vein or Sidewinder is all you'll ever need to hit the cap, making it kind of a dead stat on this necklace. Both parts of this trinket can be found elsewhere, and in larger quantities. Insipid Talon. On perfect dodge, increases all damage dealt by 2% and damage reduction by 1% for 10 seconds, max 15 stacks. I'm sorry I have Insipidus, but I had to put it down here. This is yet another example of a trinket that would be far better if all of its stacks weren't removed at once. 30% damage and 15% DR on a necklace is awesome on paper, but when it can all go away at once, it makes the long buildup not remotely worth it. While it is true that you can use Wormhole to proc it every so often to maintain the stacks, you shouldn't need to rely on a skill for a trinket to not be annoying to work with. Artful Dodger is probably the best use case for Insipid, and even then, Chef Metal has a far better case to be run with that legendary bonus. Death-Soaked Idol. Increases all damage by 6% for each entity within 20 meters suffering from a unique negative status effect, max 5 stacks. While this can potentially yield a higher damage bonus than some other necklaces on this list, the fact you need to have 5 unique entities afflicted makes it really hard to work with, especially as a solo player. Now, applying statuses to 5 enemies in 20 meters is totally possible when there are that many around. In dungeons and in the overworld, you'll have plenty of opportunities to be at max stacks. Just don't expect to be there for long. On the one hand, the more damage means things die quicker. On the other hand, things dying faster means the amulet is weaker against whatever is still standing. You and your allies do count towards this amulet stacks, but that requires all 3 of you to be running Atonement Fold or setting each other on fire. Funnily enough, Summoner Summons can actually be a decent source of friendly scorching to build stacks. It's not impossible to get value out of the amulet, but you'll wish you were just running one of the other 25% damage options. Silver Ribbon. Increases skill damage by 25%. Activating a skill grants haste for 15 seconds. If there were more damaging skills in Remnant 2, this amulet would definitely be a little higher. As it stands, only a fraction of these skills in the game deal damage, and in some cases, you'd be better off running a different amulet that better suits their damage type. Summons are best buffed by Soulstone. Detonation Trigger works really well with War Stomp, and both of Invoker's skills are better off being comboed with a cooldown necklace like Short Circuit to be spammed more often. All that said, it isn't a terrible pick for Quick Draw. Since it always crits, you'll just be pumping more raw damage into it. Engineer isn't a bad pick either. The blast damage from Impact Cannon actually gets buffed from it, unlike a Terry booster. Not a bad pick for some skills, but you could always do better. Cleansing Stone. Reduces duration of elemental status effects against wearer by 50%. Relic use cleanses elemental status effects and grants 25% of wearer's max health to all allies within 20 meters when cleansed. I want to like this necklace a lot. I really do. However, it has some problems that make using it feel weak compared to other necklaces and even some archetype perks. First off, that reduced dot duration on the player. While kind of a nice feature, as we've explained before, 2 of the damaging statuses can just be rolled to avoid, and the other 2 are worth cleansing as soon as possible, which this necklace encourages by removing them on relic use. It does make the overloaded status icon disappear faster, but guess what? It's still gonna explode the same number of times, which is ultra lame. Second off, this does not cleanse statuses for your allies, something I think the description should be much more specific about, or, just do it. And last but not least, the heal from the cleanse does not apply to you, which makes no sense. It's like they tried combining Cleansing Stone and Mentor's Charm from the first game, but didn't include everything in the package. The one kind of nice thing you can do with this necklace is proc the ally heal over and over again when wearing Atonement Fold. It does scale with your max health, but there are better ways of healing your friends out there. Red Doe Sigil. Increases relic healing effectiveness by 30%, which doubles when the wearer's health is below 50%. This amulet is the definition of outclassed. No amount of Misty Step enabling can save this from being a worse version of Nimue's Ribbon. The 10% more relic healing you'd receive is negligible at best. Most relics fully heal you when running Nimue's with triage leveled. I wish this amulet gave general healing effectiveness instead of just relic healing. Then it could be an interesting health regen booster, especially in a half health setup with reserve boosting gem. Rangefinder. After killing an enemy, gain 10% range damage and 2 meters firearm range, stacks 3 times, and lasts 10 seconds. Ranged weak spot hits will refresh duration. On paper, this amulet is actually one of the better on-kill trinkets. Being able to refresh the duration on weak spot hit can help you permanently maintain these stacks. And while the range damage buff is above average, the extra range is hardly necessary in most situations. Like I mentioned with the range buffing rings, many weapons have had their ideal ranges buffed over time. If it's a meh stat to have on rings, imagine how it looks being on an amulet. One funny thing you can do if you're running killable summons is gaining stacks from them. You can even hit their weak spots to refresh your stack duration. Maybe some would place this higher up, I've just never been a fan of on-kill trinkets. Effigy Pendant. While Great Health is present, gain 15% to all damage dealt, 10% damage reduction, and 1 additional hit before Great Health is removed. If Bitter Memento didn't have the bizarre skill Great Health conversion penalty, I'd say it'd be a worthwhile ring to combo with this necklace. Seeing as it's the only way to minimize the amount of Great Health you have, you really don't have much of a choice. If you're having any more than 10% of your health as Grey at any point, you might as well be going for Canine Keepsake. This amulet is a relic of a bygone era, long before we received all the fancy new Great Health trinkets we have today. You can run this, but you'll soon wish you had something else. Servine Keepsake. On relic use, gain a stack of Call of the Dough for 30 seconds, max 5 stacks. Call of the Dough increases movement speed by 4% per stack. When Call of the Dough expires, regain 1 relic charge per stack. This Misty Step enabling necklace is kind of an interesting concept. You can chug up to 5 relics and then get them back after 30 seconds, all the while gaining a good movement speed bonus. The major problem I have with the necklace is that each subsequent relic use after the first resets the timer. You could end up spending over 2 minutes using your relics last second out of desperation and then need to wait another 30 before getting them all back. If you're good at evading attacks, you could revive both of your friends and then get your charges back in half a minute. If you ran Shielded Heart, you could pop it and then revive them to get all 3 back. You could also just run Emergency Switch for a free charge after 30 seconds when on your last one, or use Redemption or Elixir of Life to revive your friends from a distance and save your charges. Redeemer also just doubles your relic charges, which can help you hit 5 stacks easier, but if you're using Redeemer, you really don't need to run this necklace. It's a cool idea, I just think it needs some tweaking, and maybe an additional stat to be good. Echo of the Forest. On relic use, gain Gift of the Forest for 15 seconds. When Gift of the Forest expires, relic effect is recast. Echo is another interesting concept for an amulet. Its ability to recast a relic passively increases the effective duration of many relics, relic perks, and on relic use rings. And while it can be really neat to build around a perfect set of trinkets and relic that benefit the most while wearing the necklace, there are 2 things that make this amulet clunky at best and obsolete at worst. Those 2 things are Chef Metal and Redeemer. Chef Metal, as we discussed earlier, allows you to proc all your rings and archetype relic perks by perfectly dodging. And as we just mentioned with Servine Keepsake, Redeemer doubles your relic charges by just equipping the gun. Both of them together do what this necklace tries to do exponentially better. If you don't have either, you could run it, but I'd seriously recommend avoiding it when possible. If the timer were based on whatever relic you were using, it'd be far better. Gift of the Unbound. Disables negative effects of burden rings and increases movement speed by 5% for each burden lifted, max 20%. This amulet is far better than its original version. Being rewarded for removing penalties is the way to go when many of the downsides aren't that bad, especially when the upsides are meager too. I went through every burden ring and judged it with the penalty removed to see which ones were realistically worth using with it. In my experience, only a third of the burden rings are worth using with Unbound. If 66% of the burden rings aren't worth running with a necklace, something needs to change, whether it be changing the amulet scaling buff or the rings themselves. Penalties need to be harsher and the upsides need to be more impactful. The next 2 are the other elemental damage amulets. Their numbers are the exact same as Talisman of the Sun. Unfortunately, Corrosion and Overloaded pale in comparison to Burn Dots. That isn't to say they can't help out significantly with their respective dots. Nebula can almost hit 200 a tick with the right setup, but you could also turn its dots into condensed bombs with Energized Netcoil. Overloaded is a little harder to justify. If Havoc Form applied it, then this would have a much better use case. I don't think the necklaces themselves need to be touched, rather the gear around them needs to be re-evaluated to make them worth running. Insulation Driver. While Bulwark is active, gain 15% to all damage and haste. Yet another trinket lost to time. This one is just really sad. an alright damage bonus, and a status that can be applied a dozen other ways. It's a shame too, since besides the immovable legendary bonus, it's the only other source in the game that uses the while Bulwark is active condition. I know Bulwark is easy to acquire too, but this necklace seriously needs something. Even just a 5% increase to its damage would make it a bit more competitive with the rest of the roster. The best aspect of this neck is that it makes Sweet Leaf technically give both of the effects of it and Light Extract, and that's being really generous. Whispering Marble grants 3 stacks of Bulwark, increases all damage by 2% per stack of Bulwark. At the absolute bare minimum, this necklace provides 18% DR and 6% more total damage, which isn't nothing, but there are better picks out there that increase both. What you'll realistically be using this for is to enable the assorted Bulwark rings that scale per stack, or using one of the 2 stack rings to hit the cap. Is this a worthwhile use of a necklace slot? Personally, I don't think so, mainly because of 2 specific rings, Hardcore Metal Band and Symbol of Royalty. Both provide 3 stacks of Bulwark for very little effort. Sure, they don't provide a damage bonus, but you know what does? A damage necklace you could be running instead, like Indignant Fetish, which pairs perfectly with Hardcore Metal Band. This amulet does also provide a 10% stack gain rate bonus when using the Black Greatsword, but come on, we all know that thing isn't worth it. Timekeeper's Forfeit increases status effect damage by 50%. Applying a status effect to an enemy also applies it to the wearer. This was a necklace I completely forgot to mention in my ring tier list when discussing Embrace of Shahala. It's the only method the player has of applying Overloaded to themselves. On paper, this necklace sounds like a slightly more risky but faster acting Sinister Totem, but in reality, it's not nearly as effective. First off, the dots you apply to yourself do not count as friendly fire, and therefore cannot have their damage reduced by Kindred. This means using Miasma while wearing this necklace is like pressing a please kill me now button. While the dot durations aren't affected by Affliction or Timekeeper's Jewel, for some reason, you can stack bleed up to 90 seconds, which really blows. Thankfully, you can't apply Exposed or Slow to yourself. If Kindred actually affected these self-applied dots, I consider this amulet a lot better. Relay Device. Swapping firearms increases range damage by 20% for 1.5 seconds, plus an additional 0.5 seconds for each round in the magazine, max 15 seconds. The penultimate niche amulet. This one being just an overall worse version of Onyx Pendulum. Both encourage the use of passive reloading via Provisioner's Ring, but this one just does it way worse. First off, the damage buff duration is based on bullets left in the mag, not on total magazine size. This means if you swap to an unloaded or nearing empty weapon, you can enjoy your non-existent range damage bonus. But that's alright, you can just swap again in a second and... oh. That's an unlisted 8-second cooldown on an already outclassed necklace. Yeah, if you needed any reason to avoid this amulet in a swap build, there's the crown jewel of unnecessary balance choices. Scavenger's Bauble. Increases scrap pickups by 50%, automatically pick up any nearby crafting materials. Depending on what platform you play on, and what third-party tools you choose to play with, this amulet's value varies wildly. If you're on console, or just a player in the early game of Remnant 2, extra scrap is invaluable, and in the endgame, you need hundreds of thousands of scrap to purchase all the upgrades, consumables, trinkets, armor, mutators, etc, etc. Me, personally, as someone who likes to make content for the game, I just spawn stuff in to save myself the grind. But for many others out there, I can totally see this being a must-have necklace for the near unending grind. Finally, we're at the bottom of the barrel. Starting things off, we have Core Booster. Increases weak spot damage by 50% for 10 seconds after killing an enemy. Now you may be asking, how can such a massive weak spot damage bonus be in terrible tier? Well, I'm of the opinion weak spot damage does not work in the necklace slot, at least with the 2 options we currently have. This one does grant a huge weak spot boost, but it's an on-kill necklace. It only lasts 10 seconds, and even with the weak spot legendary bonus, it only slightly beats out a flat 25% damage neck in an optimized hug setup. If this thing gave even a little bit of extra damage on top of the weak spot bonus, it'd be absolutely worth it. Talisman of Animosity was awesome in the first game. Just copy its stats over here and bam, you have a good amulet. Escalation Protocol. Increases all damage dealt by 2.5% for 10 seconds after killing an enemy. Stacks 10 times. Dealing damage refreshes the timer. What's worse than an on-kill necklace? An on-kill necklace that gets BTFO'd by every other total damage neck in the game. The only slightly nice part about this amulet is that any form of damage dealt refreshes the stack duration. Even still, needing 10 goddamn kills to charge this thing up is ridiculous. Just stick with anything else. Your DPS will thank you later. Stalker's Brand. Gain 12.5% range damage and 15% melee damage. Bonus doubles versus enemies not targeting wearer. Maybe some Invader mains or co-op players will disagree with my placement here, but I have the same problem with this necklace that I do with Assassin Seal. There's no audio or visual feedback that this amulet is helping unless you pay close attention to your damage numbers, which, as I've mentioned before, ranges from annoying to detrimental in the heat of combat. Invader's clone does make proccing both it and Assassin Seal a bit more reliable, but even then you could just run a different 25% damage neck instead, or even a 35% melee neck if you felt so inclined. Index of the Scribe increases mod and skill weak spot damage by 35%. Once again, another example of why weak spot damage doesn't work in the neck slot. This one has even less use cases than Core Booster. Tell me, how many mods and skills can weak spot hit? Not enough to justify buffing this specific type of weak spot damage. The best example of where this can be an okay pick in a build would be in a Gunslinger Engineer build. Quick Draw easily has the highest potential skill weak spot damage in the game with its single shot, and both Impact Cannon and Vulcan can easily land weak spot hits. The issue is that when you use both, you'll quickly learn that it's just generally better to run flat damage instead. Unless you're Chris Kyle and only land weak spots, you're going to be landing a fair amount of body shots, especially with the Vulcan minigun. 9 times out of 10, the flat damage from even something like Silver Ribbon will net you better DPS. The slight increase in damage from weak spot hits when wearing it compared to landing the same hits with a flat damage neck really isn't worth it in the grand scheme of things. One-Eyed Joker Idol. Neutral Backdash creates a magic card lasting 1 second. If card absorbs enemy damage, gain 25% crit chance for 5 seconds. Neutral Backdash costs 15% additional stamina. This amulet is the ultimate example of crits on a trinket not always being worth it. I have strong feelings about this one. It's been left in an absolutely abysmal state, especially with what came after in the DLCs. Not only does this necklace nerf your neutral dodges, but it also has the audacity to spawn the parry card well into the end of your iframes, leaving you wide open to being struck as you try to activate this damn thing. More on that stamina cost penalty. It's not just a simple 15% additional cost to your neutral dodges, like it states, it's actually doubling the cost of your neutral dodge. Neutral dodges at lightweight take 20 stamina, but with this amulet on, they take 40. At medium they take 25, but become 50 with it on, 30 with heavy, but 60 with the amulet. This thing is seriously bugged, and once you do finally proc the damn thing, it only lasts for 5 seconds. Gift of Euphoria destroys this waste of a trinket slot. Maybe this thing should lose both eyes, so it never has to see how pathetic it looks ever again. Wow, that was just mean. Jesus. Profane Soulstone increases summon damage by 30% and summon movement speed by 15%, reduces total damage reduction by 10% per active summon. This is the one trinket that literally has no purpose in Remnant 2. Its only use is to be traded for either regular Soulstone or Profane Heart, 2 pieces of gear that are leagues above it. There's no source that benefits you from having reduced DR either, no trinket or mechanic. It is 100% useless as a necklace, and even then, I would still choose to run it over these last 2 amulets. Ornate Amulet. Activating a skill increases all damage by 5% for 10 seconds, max 5 stacks. If there was ever any doubt that the last DLC had some bizarre balancing decisions, first of all, have you seen the one-shotting machine that is Monorail? This amulet is an extreme example of the opposite end of the balance spectrum. It has all the makings of a bad trinket, stacks draining all at once, only giving the bare minimum of 25% damage, and a proc condition that, while not impossible, can be very challenging outside of a specific build, that being a skill spam build, which, might I remind you, has far better candidates for the next slot. All around just a bad trinket. If it were 10% per stack up to 3, it still wouldn't be amazing, but it'd at least be better than what we have now. And for the love of God, make the stack strain 1 at a time. 10 seconds is just way too short when some skills are active for 20 or more seconds. Weightless Weight increases movement speed by 0.75% and reduces stamina cost of all actions by 0.75% for every 5 points of armor encumbrance. Finally, the last and absolute least, the Paperweight. Ever since the game came out, I knew this thing was just plain bad. The conversion rate is so terrible that even in full Lidos, it only grants 14.2% movement speed and reduced stamina cost. This is basically nothing. Both move speed and stamina costs are found on other trinkets in tremendously increased amounts. Most people know it's awful. I imagine the average new player experience fighting it for the first time involves them taking one look at the stats and then never again. It's a bigger joke than Ring of Infinite Damage. This one actually tried to be something and failed spectacularly. There we have it, all 103 necklaces ranked, discussed, yada yada yada. What were your thoughts? I tried to make this video more involved in the visual department this time around. I honestly wish I did the same for the ring tier list, but we live and learn. Once again, I severely apologize for this video taking this long to come out. I ended up coming down sick and losing a few days in early February, and beyond that my general laziness kicked in. But for now, I'm gonna get working on my next project. What that'll be, I have no clue. If you like these in-depth videos of me covering the various aspects of Remnant 2, let me know in the comments. I got a lot of fantastic feedback from the ring tier list, and I would love to see some more. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.